Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. We are going to get started in a minute to allow everybody to join us. So hang tight and we'll get started soon. Okay, let's get started. Once again, good morning and good afternoon, and thanks for joining. I'm Justin Sabetti, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Smarsh. In today's discussion, hybrid work, recharge your cyber and supervision compliance engine. So as we've begun to understand what the hybrid work future looks like, regulated industries are faced with a new spectrum of both communications and cyber compliance challenges. So the home office is the same as the corporate office as far as regulators are concerned. And firms are implementing new tools, new policies, and ways to effectively remain compliant across both communications and cybersecurity. They've got new policies for both internal and external communications and have been implementing controls for cyber around users, networks, and devices. So for the agenda today, we're going to drill into a few very important topics around this hybrid work world and how to stay compliant. We're going to start with devices, BYOD. What are some of the risks and best practices for policy? Looking at lost or stolen devices and ensuring compliance there. We're also going to discuss data leakage and protecting data from being transferred by employees and any privacy concerns. And then finally, collaboration tools. As firms are using tools such as Microsoft Teams, Zoom, IMing, etc., they need to be closing the compliance gaps there. And then we'll wrap up with a brief overview of how Smarsh and Entreda can help. So with that, let's meet our panelists today. First, we have Rishi Malik, Director of Product at Entreda. Rishi's been with Entreda since 2016, and he's played a pivotal role in developing their customer success, product support, and product teams. He currently leads the product management team, ensuring that they develop cutting-edge cybersecurity and cybersecurity compliance solutions for regulated industries. We also have Elizabeth Bachner. Elizabeth is our expert consultant at Smarsh's professional services department, and she's been helping clients implement policies and procedures to ensure compliance for over 7 years. So welcome, Rishi and Elizabeth.
Hey, good to be here.
So let's dive in. BYOD, it obviously has many benefits. Employees can use their personal devices to conduct business. Employers empower those employees to be more efficient and effective in their jobs. But of course, that brings its own set of risks as well as compliance challenges. So let's start with Rishi. Rishi, what are some of your clients discussing with you around BYOD? And can you tell us a little bit about how cybersecurity has changed now that organizations are relying more and more on a remote workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Justin. So clearly, COVID has created a large shift towards increased full-time remote work, right? Most firms we talk to are taking either a fully remote work approach, and others are taking a hybrid remote work approach, in that some users are in office while others are not. Now, with where technology is today, we're in a unique position that most of the workforce is able to accomplish either 100% or close to 100% of the responsibilities remotely, right? With collaboration tools like Zoom, Teams, as well as a heavy usage of cloud applications to conduct daily business responsibilities. This has created a new set of cyber and cyber compliance related challenges for most organizations who take one of these approaches, where at some capacity employees are now using their personal devices, aka BYOD, or bring your own devices to work devices, to conduct business. Now, we're hearing more and more firms ask questions like, What devices are my employees using to work on? Are those devices secure? How many are there, right? What networks are they using? Are my users working from home or their local Starbucks? Are all the devices, including BYOD, adhering to our firm's cybersecurity compliance requirements, right? All legitimate questions. Now, when users are within the corporate or four walls using company-owned devices, it's much easier to ensure that the devices are secured and monitored. But we've been hearing over and over from customers how they're unable to account for BYOD devices in use and security measures and cyber policy adherence on those devices. So that's really where it starts, right? I mean, the first step firms need to do to take with remote workforce is being able to monitor all the devices in the field. That's the first step. Once you are able to identify where and what devices are being used, you can then begin to identify within those devices where the cyber risk lies, and finally be able to enforce and ensure that those devices are adhering to your cybersecurity related policies and ensuring that they're monitored and that they're secured.
Excellent. Thank you, Rishi. So to Elizabeth on that same topic, what are some of the best practices around policy for BYOD communication?
Sure. So really the first and kind of key point here is make a strong policy, make it explicit, and make sure that it's understood across the board. So what that looks like will, of course, depend firm to firm, but really the most important part is that it's very explicit, very clear what the boundaries are, and that your employees understand that and can be proven to understand that. Because I think just as much as there's a risk of people, acting maliciously, there's risk of people just kind of innocently putting themselves in risky situations due to misunderstanding policy. Kind of other component there is, rather than just put a policy in place, make sure that you're actually monitoring it. You're looking for potential violations, potential risk. Again, not always malicious, sometimes it can be innocent. So getting ahead of that proactively and taking those opportunities to educate can do a lot to make sure that your firm stays secure and stays in good standing with regulators. And really the final point that I put there is around monitoring for compliance is leverage the many, many tools available to you at this point. So Supervision e-communications, really my bread and butter, and it is a strong tool to look for things like channel hopping, somebody moving from a monitored communication channel like their work email over to text message. There's also, of course, monitoring tools to how those devices are being used. If you're seeing like regular activity, like people downloading attachments on their phone, but not at work computers, there's just endless different surveillance tools out there to give you a lot of data to be proactive and on top of your game in terms of monitoring for risk.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So let's move on to lost or stolen devices. So obviously this is an important consideration for firms, especially with cell phones. I'll ask Rishi, what are some of the best practices that Entreda shares with their clients in the case of a stolen device?
Yeah, so lost and stolen devices is definitely a cybersecurity concern. Luckily, there's multiple things you could do to address this. There's really two categories of things you can do in regard to stolen devices. There's preventative actions, and then there's reactive actions that you can put into place. So from a preventative approach, there are three best practices that I would suggest. First, it's important to ensure that your computer or your cell phone is password protected. Now, this means complex passwords on a computer and ideally complex passcodes on a mobile device as well, as leveraging biometric login capabilities when available. Now, second, you should have your computer and or mobile devices encrypted, which provides you an additional layer of security on those devices in case that they do get in the wrong hands. The good news here is most newer Mac devices, any business-grade Windows device, as well as most supported mobile devices have built-in encryption options available that make it really simple. Third, enabling a screen lock or an auto lock on your devices is critical. Now, what this does is it ensures that if your device is idle for several minutes, it will automatically lock your computer. So hypothetically, if you were logged into a device before it got stolen, there would be an added layer of security requiring a password to get into that stolen or lost device. That's kind of the preventative approach. Now, from a reactive approach, you want to make sure to have a monitoring solution like an MDM solution on your devices. Now, our MDM solution, for example, provides users with geolocation, where you would be able to see exactly where your lost or stolen device is at. And it will also allow you to remotely wipe a device in case it is stolen and you don't have a way of retrieving it. So that allows you to remotely wipe or factory reset your device, which allows you to ensure that none of your sensitive data gets into the hands of a bad actor.
Excellent. Seems like a critical tool for sure. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to data leakage, and we'll start with Elizabeth this time. It's obviously another growing issue, a result of the hybrid workforce that we all live in. What are some of the more common examples of data leakage that you have heard about with clients, and how can firms address them with policy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a great question because this is really top of mind for a lot of people, not just with the new hybrid workspace, but, multiple generations, access to different tools. Data leakage is a huge concern for a lot of people. In terms of what kind of data leakage we see, it really kind of crosses the gamut there. So, most common you think of is people sharing files. Maybe you have a spreadsheet or a document that leaves the firm in a way that it shouldn't be. Somebody sending an email from their work email to their home address, somebody sending something to a friend, whatever the case is. There's also issues, and this really ties back to the BYOD around people accessing information in public spaces and concerns there, be it shared Wi-Fi and any potential kind of risks around that, or people just simply walking up behind you at a coffee shop and seeing information they shouldn't have. So in terms of how do you address it, first and foremost, be proactive. Think through what individuals and what teams in your organization have access to various data. It's not appropriate for every person at the firm to have access to every single piece of information. So be thoughtful about that and regularly review it, because roles change, work projects change. There's a lot of things that you should be checking in on and leveraging your InfoSec team if applicable there. And then, likewise, create those policies and procedures. So if you have high-risk individuals and with access to data, make sure they understand they shouldn't be sitting in a coffee shop accessing files that have people's personal information or pertinent company information. Make sure that it's imparted to your team just how important that is. And then, of course, the complement there is just monitoring access. Tools have gotten really fantastic. Microsoft has a lot of built-in audit trails around, access to SharePoint files, things like that. In our Smarsh solutions, we have end-to-end auditing of every single interaction that somebody's had with the platform. Most tools have those kinds of things. So not only reactively looking at those, but also kind of baking into your monitoring, doing occasional spot check audits of how people are monitoring data, when they're leaving the system with that data, and what devices they're using to access that information.
Excellent, thank you. How about Rishi on the cyber side? With the human factor, it's a real concern. Is there a way that firms, tools they can adopt, or how we can help them protect their data from being transferred onto a USB or some other means?
Yeah, absolutely. So the human factor is enormous, right? When it comes to cyber breaches and cyber incidents across the world. Data loss, commonly referred to as data leakage, is a big issue, and it's something that we see regulators look at during cyber audits. It's also something that we're seeing firms ask about more and more. It is important to not only tackle USBs as a data leakage vehicle, but also cloud storage solutions, which are increasingly popular in the recent years. There's two approaches when it comes to tackling the issue with data leakage. So the first is implementing a data leakage prevention system, also known as DLP. Now, this is any system that prevents the end user from transferring data on or off of a USB and/or a cloud storage solution. This solution allows the user or the end user with little flexibility, but it is effective in preventing data leakage. Typically, what you'll see this used on corporate-owned devices, as most employees that are using the personal devices would not want this type of limitation on their daily use personal computer from a BYOD perspective. Now, the second approach is implementing something called a data leakage monitoring solution, also known as a DLM. This allows the end user to continue to use their USBs and or cloud storage solutions. However, it monitors the activity on those respective data leakage vehicles. So it allows you to identify if users are moving, deleting, or altering a bunch of files on or off of a USB and or a cloud storage solution. So I'll tell you a quick story about DLM. Or drive leakage monitoring. About a few years back now, we actually had an employee in a firm that leveraged Entreda, and she was leaving her firm. Now, before she left her firm, she had transferred hundreds of client-sensitive documents onto her USB drive. So luckily, the DLM solution was able to identify exactly what was moved and when, and the firm was alerted on the fact that files were moved onto her USB drive in real time. And that allowed the firm to take prompt action on that.
Excellent. Great insights there. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic, collaboration tools. So as we've seen the exponential growth of use of collaboration tools like Teams, Zoom, IMing on Slack, etc. Firms are struggling with how to address compliance from this collaboration tool perspective. Let's start with Elizabeth on this one. So, what are some of the common examples of compliance risks from collaboration tools and some best practices around policy and using them?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the largest risks around collaboration tools is denying them, not adopting them if the market's demanding it, be it your team who's like, I don't want Teams, I want Slack or something like that. And that's just overwhelmingly the sentiment at your firm, or if that's what customers are feeling as well. People will use them anyways. So making it available to them and having smart proactive monitoring tools in place puts you in a much more defensive position. Of course, that gets expensive. So you need to think of like, what are the most popular tools? What'll be most adopted? But, move with the market, shift with their customers, shift with your employees to make sure that you're compliant and monitoring those tools. A lot of these tools like Zoom, WebEx, things like that allow you to suppress certain features and functionalities. So if there are compliance concerns around, people chatting in Zoom when you're recording it, but not capturing chats or things like that, you do have the ability to suppress some of those features, which is a pretty attractive option for a lot of compliance officers out there. And then, kind of the common theme with me is write a strong policy, make it explicit and hard to misinterpret, and make sure your folks are trained. It puts you in a defensible position with regulators, and it also just makes your job easier and makes everybody a little bit more successful at making sure you're compliant and efficient.
Excellent. Explicit being a very key word there. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And then Rishi, on the topic of collaboration, is there anything to be aware of from a cyber perspective?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I guess you want to make sure that you're always using the latest version of any software application, including collaboration tools like Zoom. This helps ensure that the latest security patches would be applied. Simple things like password protecting meetings is a simple way to ensure that no random people are joining your Zoom meetings as well. We're actually working on a pretty cool feature right now where before logging into an application like Zoom, the Entreda application would kick in and it would ensure that the device launching Zoom is being monitored and secured. It will also ensure that the security settings are up to par before allowing anyone into Zoom. So kind of cool feature we're working on. This is a unique solution set in the field today, and we feel that it will add an important security layer to Zoom, a product that we're seeing used more and more, and we continue to grow as we continue this remote work trend.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to Q&A. I'm going to check the chats and see if I have some questions here for Rishi and Elizabeth. Maybe Elizabeth, you could take this one on data leaks. What are other firms doing to monitor data leakage?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, some of what I touched on before around using tools that have those and audit capabilities and make sure that you're proactively monitoring them. An example with a customer I worked with recently is they need to give search across their entire archive of e-communication access for regulatory requests and things like that. But there's also a lot of concern from their compliance team of people getting a little curious, running searches that are outside of scope and potentially accessing data. So what we worked with them on is identifying good reports and then kind of creating a quarterly cadence where they go and audit 10% of all searches. So, just having something like that, which both identifies those risks as well as has a great story to tell regulators. Like we recognize this risk and this is the proactive steps we're taking to address it.
Right. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to add something?
No.
Okay. Let's see, what do we have here? Question for Rishi. Do we have access to all the personal information on a BYOD device?
Good question. So Entreda does not. So we take privacy very seriously. Our application is able to monitor security settings on devices. But it's purposely built not to monitor personal information. So for example, let's say our app can see that you are using Google Chrome on your computer and that it's an out-of-date version of Google Chrome, but the application will not be able to see what websites you're visiting. Another example is we're able to see that your mobile device is not encrypted. However, we're unable to see any of the text messages on your mobile device. So the application is really focused on monitoring security settings as opposed to personal information.
Excellent, thank you. I have one here that Elizabeth, perhaps this is for you. We don't see violations with BYOD. How important is it really to have a policy?
Mm-hmm. I guess I'd say two things on this. First is, my house has never burned down, but I still have fire alarms in all of the key areas. So you're not really, I would say, potentially very risky practice to say, we're not seeing these violations. So it's not a good use of our time to monitor for them. You still want to make sure that you're checking, even if it's an edge case. Edge case is fantastic. That means your folks are well educated and they're compliant. It's a great scenario. And, kind of along those same lines, it's a good story to tell regulators. You have a strong written policy and procedure, you're taking steps to educate and monitor for it, speaks to the culture of compliance at your firm. And then I guess kind of the final thought I'd add to that is you might have more violations than you're aware of. You want to continually revisit your policies, look for areas where you might be not really aware of it. For example, maybe your CEO shouldn't be ever working out of a coffee shop or something, going back to some of those earlier examples, and it just hasn't popped up before. So there's certainly a lot of value to monitoring for BYOD violations.
Great, thank you. Let's do one more. Here's one for Rishi. Is BYOD still a major concern given our reliance on cloud services and apps?
Yeah, so great question. BYOD is still a concern given our reliance on cloud services and apps. So there is a misnomer going around that just because users leverage cloud solutions and are becoming less dependent on local programs on their devices, that they can fully rely on the security of the cloud apps and almost neglect their endpoint security. And endpoints are, think of them like the gateway to those cloud applications, right? And they need to be monitored and secured. To give you an example, let's say that an endpoint gets breached and is then accessing any cloud application. Now, the cloud application has no idea that that endpoint has been breached, right? It's going to allow the user in, assuming that they give the correct credentials when prompted to do so. Now, this can actually lead to additional data within that cloud application getting compromised if the endpoint's not properly secured. So due to reasons like this, it is still important to monitor and secure all endpoints, especially BYOD devices.
Great, thank you. So that's all the questions we have time for today. For any questions that we haven't answered, I will be reaching out and following up with you after the webinar. Thank you very much, Rishi and Elizabeth. And I just wanted to say for you, those of you who are not familiar with Entreda, Entreda unifies a cybersecurity monitoring, reporting, and enforcement tool. So through Entreda unifies software, you're able to monitor cyber risk and cyber policy adherence across your entire organization. You're able to auto-remediate cyber-related deficiencies in real time and easily access audit-ready reports all across a single pane of glass, your personal dashboard. And I also just wanted to mention and invite you to take Smarsh's hybrid work risk assessment. So you can find this at smarsh.com under resources, then guides. It'll provide your firm with a better understanding of where you stand with compliance risk across infrastructure, policies, training, tech, and automated controls. So if you would like to discuss your compliance needs with us, please submit a request to be contacted on smarsh.com or reach out to your Smarsh or Entreda account executives. We'd love to discuss your specific business needs. I'd like to say thank you to everybody for joining this call, and thank you to our panelists as well. We will be sharing a recording of this in the next couple of days, and that will conclude our webinar for today, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.